My 73rd birthday began like a warm, familiar melody, predictable, comforting, soft around the edges. The house smelled of cinnamon tea and fresh lilies, both chosen by my daughters who insisted that Mom deserves a pretty morning. Sunlight slanted through the lace curtains, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. It was the kind of morning that made a person believe life could still be gentle. By early afternoon, the house buzzed with the sound of laughter, guests arriving with wrapped presents, and the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Friends who had known me since my 40s gathered around the dining room table, telling old stories, patting my shoulders, and insisting I hardly looked a day over 60. My daughters had gone all out, string lights twinkled along the ceiling beams, and my grandchildren had drawn poster-sized cards full of crooked hearts and glitter glue. It should have been the perfect day. Harold, my husband of 53 years, stood near the fireplace in his pressed navy suit, nursing a glass of wine. He looked proud of the party, proud of the turnout, proud of himself. That was Harold's way. He always took credit for things he barely lifted a finger to do. But he smiled at me from across the room and I smiled back because that too was part of the tradition. Around 6 o'clock, just as everyone squeezed into the living room for the birthday toast, the atmosphere shifted. Harold cleared his throat in that particular way he only did before making an announcement. I paused with a plate of hors d'oeuvres in my hand, watching him closely. He adjusted his tie. His fingers trembled, just slightly but enough for me to notice. "Everyone," he said, raising his glass, "thank you for being here to celebrate my wife's 73rd birthday." A chorus of cheers and happy birthday filled the air. I smiled and dipped my head, but he didn't continue with a toast about me. Instead, he gestured toward the front door. "Before we cut the cake," Harold said, "there's something important I want to share." The door opened. A woman stepped inside, mid-40s, carefully dressed, with a stiff nervousness in her posture. Beside her stood two young adults, late 20s perhaps. Their presence sucked the air out of the room. My daughters, my sweet sensitive girls, went pale. The guests exchanged puzzled looks. My grandkids stared in open confusion. Harold's chest rose with a strange, triumphant breath. "This," he announced, "is my second family. I've hidden them for 30 years. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered. My youngest daughter let out a strangled sound, part sob, part disbelief. My eldest backed into the wall, her lips quivering, her eyes shining with betrayal. The room fell impossibly silent. People looked to me, waiting for my collapse, waiting for my tears, waiting for me to crumble into the fragile old woman they thought I was. But I did not crumble. Slowly, I walked toward Harold. My emerald dress swayed softly around my legs. I reached into the drawer of the antique cabinet and pulled out a small, polished wooden box tied with a silk ribbon. I placed it gently in his hands. He blinked, confusion overtaking his bravado. What is this?" I smiled, calm, warm, almost tender. "I knew," I said softly. "This is for you." A whisper rippled through the room. Harold hesitated, fingers trembling as he tugged at the ribbon. The box creaked open. Whatever confidence he had gathered for this grand moment drained from his face the instant he looked inside. His hands began to shake violently. The room waited breathless. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. Not for me but for him. People like to believe betrayal arrives suddenly, like a lightning strike, a sharp crack that splits a life in two. But mine came quietly, soft as dust, settling little by little across the years until the weight of it was undeniable. I was 43 when the first shadow slipped into my marriage. It was nothing dramatic. A simple moment. Harold walking through the door late one evening, loosening his tie with a strange softness on his face. Not the weary frustration of a long day at work softness. Something gentler, something warmed by someone else's attention. He kissed my cheek distractedly and went straight to the shower. When he walked past me, the scent followed him, jasmine. Not my perfume. Not even close. I noticed. But I said nothing. I learned early that silence can be a shield. The clues came gradually after that. Unfamiliar numbers calling late at night. Harold stepping out to take business calls in a hushed voice. Receipts for dinners at restaurants we had never visited together. His suit smelling faintly of floral soap instead of the cedarwood cologne he always used. And then there were the absences. "Oh, they need me at the office this weekend," he would say. Or, "The charity board is having an emergency meeting." Or my favorite lie of all, "A colleague is going through a crisis and I need to support him." Each excuse polished smooth from overuse. For a while I pretended. I didn't want my daughters, still young and full of innocence, to see the cracks forming in their safe childhood home. They adored their father. I wouldn't take that from them. Not when they needed stability more than truth. But the pretending took its toll. One night, after Harold left again for another conference, I sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold in my hands. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. My reflection in the window looked older than my years, tired in a way makeup could never cover. That was the night I made my choice. If Harold intended to build a second life, then I would build a second truth. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Marcia. She was sharp-eyed, sharp-witted, and sharp enough to see through the flimsy stories I had endured. She never judged me. She simply asked, "How much do you want to know?" "Everything," I said, and she delivered. She found the woman first, Harold's special colleague, he claimed needed mentoring. She found the apartment he paid for under a business alias. She found photographs, dates, secret trips, intimate moments, all preserved for me in neatly organized folders. Then came the most devastating report, the birth of a child 29 years ago, and another 3 years later. I sat in my bedroom, holding the reports with trembling hands. 2 innocent children, 2 half-siblings to my daughters, 2 lives built from Harold's lies. And yet, when I wiped my tears, the anger did not twist into bitterness. Instead, it hardened into purpose. For decades, Harold lived blissfully ignorant, believing his lies were clever enough, his charm strong enough, his secrecy impenetrable. He didn't know that every receipt, every photo, every bank transfer quietly joined the collection inside the wooden box in my closet, the box I would one day place in his hands. While he lived in duplicity, I lived in preparation. I strengthened myself. I educated myself. I made financial plans behind locked doors, opened accounts with my maiden name, bought a small cottage far beyond his awareness, and secured lawyers whose names Harold had never heard. All while cooking dinner, attending school recitals, celebrating anniversaries, and pretending to believe every word Harold said. He thought my silence meant ignorance. But silence can be sharper than accusations. I waited 30 years. Not for revenge, but for the perfect moment. And on my 73rd birthday, in front of everyone he had tried to impress, the moment finally came. When Harold lifted the lid of the wooden box, the room felt as if it inhaled and refused to exhale. The air thickened, heavy with curiosity, dread, and the unmistakable electricity of a truth about to detonate. Harold's confident posture wilted before my eyes. The hand that had been so steady raising a glass to announce his hidden family now trembled as he pinched the first photograph between his fingers. It was a picture of him and the other woman taken nearly 3 decades ago. They weren't doing anything scandalous, just walking hand in hand outside a small Italian restaurant. But the intimacy in their smiles, the way his body leaned toward hers, it told the real story. Gasps broke out around the room as guests leaned closer. Harold's throat bobbed. How, where did you? But his voice dissolved when he lifted the next item. A neatly typed report from my investigator, dated 28 years back. It detailed the pregnancy of the woman now standing awkwardly by the door, her gaze flicking between me and the floor. The son shifted uncomfortably. The daughter looked away, shame burning in her cheeks. My daughters leaned in, reading over Harold's shoulder. Their faces stiffened, shocked, yes, but also relieved. I watched the realization dawn in their eyes. I had known. I had protected them from the shattering truth for decades, choosing their stability over my pride. Harold flipped through more papers. Bank transfers disguised as charitable donations. Receipts for hotel rooms in cities he claimed to despise visiting. Copies of emails he'd sent under an alias. Even a handwritten card from his mistress, in which she thanked him for choosing us no matter what it costs. The irony was exquisite. A murmur rose among the guests. Some whispered to others. A few elderly neighbors stared openly, not bothering to hide their disapproval. Harold looked up at them, desperate, pleading silently for someone to speak in his defense. But no one did. His gaze returned to the box. Inside sat the last folder, thicker than the others. His hand shook violently as he opened it. Legal documents. Signed. Stamped. Finalized. The fear in his eyes sharpened into panic. What is this?" he croaked. I stepped forward, my voice calm, almost kind. "Those are the filings. Divorce, asset separation, property transfer, fraud investigations. You name it." Whispers erupted. Even the children in the room were silent, wide-eyed observers of the collapsing man before them. Harold staggered back as if someone had struck him. "Fraud? You can't do that. You committed it," I corrected gently. "You hid assets. You lied in joint financial disclosures. You funneled marital income into secret accounts. You think I collected all this just to look at it?" My daughters exchanged glances, first stunned, then proud. The other woman finally stepped forward, voice trembling. "Harold, you told me everything was under control. You said you were going to leave her." I turned to her, offering a small, sympathetic smile. "Dear Harold said many things. That's his greatest talent. Until the truth stands beside him." Harold's chest heaved. Rage and humiliation fought for dominance on his face. "You planned this ambush?" "I planned my freedom," I replied. The room fell silent again, this time with reverence, not shock. I lifted the lid of the box and closed it gently, as though sealing a story that no longer belonged in my life. "You wanted to reveal your truth today," I said softly. "So I revealed mine." Harold looked at his second family for support, but they backed away. The woman he'd promised the world stared at him with widening horror as she realized she too had been deceived. Not by me, but by him. And as Harold stood there, stripped of his lies, stripped of his pride, stripped of the illusion he controlled anything, I understood something. A man who builds two lives never expects to lose both in one night. But he did. The party ended, but the evening did not. The night air outside the house was sharp and clean, carrying the faint scent of winter roses from the garden I had tended for decades. Inside, silence hung heavily. Guests lingered awkwardly, unsure whether to offer condolences, congratulations, or merely shuffle out. But I felt no uncertainty. I knew exactly what had happened, and it felt like freedom. Harold had left the house hours ago, not with a defiant stride, but with the heavy, defeated shuffle of a man who had finally realized he had lost control. The other woman had followed him, angry, confused, and humiliated, their children trailing behind silently. It was as if a phantom of a family had vanished, leaving only the truth behind. I turned to my daughters, who stood beside me in the dim glow of the chandelier. They looked at me with eyes I had not seen since they were children, wide, trusting, and full of admiration. "You protected us," my eldest whispered. I nodded, brushing a stray strand of silver hair behind my ear. "I always knew, my loves. And now we are free." Freedom. The word felt delicious on my tongue. For 30 years, I had carried the weight of his lies like a stone in my chest. For 30 years I had endured his charm, his late-night excuses, his carefully constructed stories. And tonight the weight had lifted. The stone was gone, replaced with something far stronger. Clarity. In the weeks that followed, the legal proceedings unfolded like a storm. Every transaction, every secret, every carefully hidden deed of his was laid bare in court. My lawyer, sharp and meticulous, ensured that Harold could claim nothing. The house, the accounts, the investments, all were legally transferred, each document sealed and verified. His second family was shocked to discover the truth of his manipulations. The woman who thought she was his world now realized she had been nothing more than a pawn in his decades-long game of deceit. But the most satisfying part was not the legal victory. It was the faces, the ones around me and the one I never had to look at again. The stunned neighbors, the murmuring friends, the eyes of my daughters that glimmered with pride. All of it confirmed something I had known for years. The truth, revealed at the right time, is a weapon far more powerful than anger. I moved into my countryside cottage shortly after the divorce was finalized. It was small but full of light, with windows that opened onto lavender fields and mornings that smelled of dew and earth. I spent my days walking the hills, tending to my garden, reading books I had never had time for, and watching my grandchildren play under the sun. Each moment of peace was a silent triumph over the life Harold had tried to control. Sometimes I thought about the wooden box, the box that had changed everything. It had held 30 years of secrets, evidence of betrayal, and the culmination of my patience. But it had also held hope. Hope that one day justice would take the form of a quiet, elegant reveal. Hope that one day, my daughters would see the strength I had gathered not in confrontation but in careful preparation. Occasionally, Harold attempted to reach out. Letters, phone calls, even the occasional desperate plea for a meeting. I never responded. There was nothing to say. I had already said it all with the truth. The law had already sided with me. And the universe had already balanced the scales in its quiet, perfect way. The other woman eventually moved on, though not before confronting Harold with the facts I had provided. Their world, built on deception, had crumbled. I did not rejoice in their misery, but I did feel the quiet satisfaction that comes from watching lies unravel naturally, without my interference. On my 74th birthday, I sat on the veranda of my new home, a cup of tea warming my hands. The lavender swayed gently in the wind, and the sun cast golden light across the hills. My daughters and grandchildren were laughing nearby, filling the air with the kind of joy that no betrayal can taint. And for the first time in decades, I felt completely, utterly free. Harold had given me heartbreak, deceit, and years of silent suffering. But I had given him something far greater, the truth. And the truth, revealed with patience, strategy, and love for those who mattered most, had destroyed him more beautifully than any anger ever could. I raised my cup to the sky, smiling. 30 years of endurance had led me here, to peace, to triumph, to freedom. And as the wind carried the scent of lavender and the sound of my daughter's laughter, I finally understood. Revenge was never about cruelty. It was about reclaiming the life they tried to steal from me, and savoring the sweetness of every liberated moment.